Hello, howdy, howdy. This is week four, part two, and I will start sharing my screen. Okay, let's do this. Stereo. All right. Yeah, so we're talking about media materials. We're continuing with discussing objects. So what is an object? Okay, this is something that can get really philosophical. Um, you know what? I'm actually going to recommend this video. Um, about another Vsauce video about chairs. Um, do chairs exist is the name of the video. And so you could get really weird and deep with this question. Like what is an object? Um, I just can put here before I forget. So essentially, it's a collection matter within a defined contiguous boundary in three-dimensional space. Basically, meaning something that's attached to itself and isn't anything else, really. And so, this video that I just mentioned explores that. Explores like if you break a chair into little splinters, is the splinter a chair? Is a chair less a chair? For the sake of this lecture and for art in general, we're not worried too much about that. Unless you're making the artwork that's specifically dealing with that, we understand that this sculpture here, this is a singular object, the sculpture, not the background. The background's not a part of it. Okay, so we're gonna keep the definition simple for this sense, right? Um, and so an object is different from an image because is meant to create an illusion of space or dimensionality on the flat picture plane, mostly because you can draw on sculptures and stuff like that. But we're considering flat picture planes right now for simplicity. So objects embody that dimension directly most of the time. Like this is supposed to be an animal of some sort, right? Maybe a cow. Um, and it's not a drawing of it. It's meant to depict the space, the volume of it, right? It has the embodiment of it. It has an objectness to it, right? But and also what's important to note is objects are constrained by physics of real life, and that's something you don't have to be concerned about in imagery, right? And so maybe that can be a way of thinking about it as well, right? But this point says, yes, of course you can do floating stuff in computer generated imagery, whatever. We're talking about physical objects here, okay? We'll talk about digital too, but at the very end. So here's a hybrid image slash object. So this is Lily Lakeridge, a badass neon artist. She founded the Museum of Neon Art in Los Angeles. And yeah, so she made a lot of neon art. That was what she was known for. Okay, and you can see her working on this piece, which is massive. Uh, these are really heavy, large objects that are very sculptural. But here you see it's a sculptural piece where it's a big heavy thing, but also it's depicting imagery of this a snake and this cougar. All right, so it's an object, but it also holds imagery within it. The neon tubes are bent to look at or to look like certain things that exist in the real world. Okay. Um, even here's this really fun depiction of flowers in a vase, right? Vase, whatever. So the flowers, I mean, they're technically fake, but they're objects, right? But the stems are constructed of a neon tube, which is like a building material used as imagery. So this is kind of a weird in between. All right, three-dimensional art. Forms of sculpture. First one is freestanding. Okay, so like it implies freestanding stands on the ground. Or you could consider it to be coming from the ceiling as well, but most of the time we're talking about standing on the ground. Okay? Um, mm, Not always, but freestanding sculptures you can move around 360 degrees. Sometimes that's not the case, right? Like maybe this sculpture right here, you're not really meant to walk around it. You can, and I have, but freestanding sculpture, when people say that, they tend to be talking about things you can walk 360 degrees around, and that's what it's meant to be. Uh, but again, there's exceptions, of course. Yeah, here's a couple examples from John Layton, who was a mentor of mine in undergrad, where he combined wood and glass. Okay. And here's another one. And there's this dog Pickle. Unfortunately, they've both passed away. But they were lovely people, and I love them a lot. Relief. Okay, so relief is something that's pretty much stuck to a wall or some kind of block material. Okay. And it's sticking out of that material as opposed to you basically, when it comes to drawing and painting and such, you put material on something, and with relief, that something is the artwork itself as well. It's made of the same thing. So we have a couple types. The first is low relief or bas relief. Right. And you can see it's sticking out because we understand light and shadows in real life. We understand that this is not drawn, it's carved out of this space, and it's very, very thin. So it is sort of in between the image and object, where yeah, it does have this objectness to it, but it has the flatness of an image as well. Right. And so yeah, these are both low relief images. Here's a couple more where you can see like this, especially this one, there could be a lot of dimensionality to it, but the artist chose to create a low relief sculpture instead. For what reason? I don't know. I'm not the artist and I didn't read about it. But you can see that that was a choice because this is kind of a weird, rare thing to do in the last like few decades. You don't really see much low relief around. So it's always good to find it. And these I've seen in real life. It's my friend Laura's house. And yeah, so this is Becky Bosch. And you can see that it has this sort of very textural element to it. And there's drawings in it that become object-ish. So it is kind of like this funny in-between type of thing. Right. High relief is where basically more than half of it sticks out. There might be more precise definitions out there. I don't really know, but that was the best I could really that's what best I can talk about as far as what I've researched. I'm not a sculptor. I've only taken a 3D art class once, like over a decade, maybe even 2 decades ago, almost 2 decades ago. But high relief is generally half or more will be sticking out. Okay. So this is a really interesting temple. I didn't find it. I it's also called like the David Beckham temple because there's also depiction of David Beckham in relief, but that didn't come on my search results. But I just thought these were more interesting than David Beckham anyways. Um, this weird Pikachu thing and Pinocchio, etc. All right, methods of sculpture. First is additive, where you're adding materials together. Something that we all do is, well, not all of us, like making a cake, for example, right? That could be a form of additive sculpture where you're bringing these elements together to form an end sculpture, an end piece, right? So you're adding material to itself or other material to it, right? And that's what cakes are. You add a bunch of materials together and it forms this thing after this process, right? So right here you see armature being used. So these fingers are this wire thing. And so these are basically used as skeletons, right? And this is useful because sometimes it can take the place of using a lot of material. So it's not just a bunch of material you're using. It could be sort of a base, but also to help this clay, for example, stick to something. Also, when it comes to claymation, it's good to use that to move the fingers around. So um, the the fingers are movable in this instance, right? Welding is a form of additive sculpture. So yeah, here's a bunch of materials stuck together in fun and interesting ways. This is the same piece. Paper mache, wood, wire, paint, some other stuff. Yeah, it's putting stuff together in a way that creates a larger whole than just the individual constituent parts, right? And same thing with ceramics, right? Especially not everything is like that, but with this additive, like she was putting this candle coffee cup holder, this candle holder coffee cup thing together by putting clay onto other clay. And this sculpture is using carpet and clay and other materials to combine this like bigger form, right? And as a bonus, it has imagery on it as well that emulates form directly. Here's another just beautiful, elegant piece that I just really like, so I wanted to share it. But also, it's a good example of this is additive because this artist didn't carve out the negative space. It would make more sense to make this by putting the sticks and the other things together as opposed to carving out from a block. And speaking of carving out from a block, that's called subtractive. Okay. And that's removing a material from itself. Okay. And here's the model or the maquette. And this is Todd Fram, who's working on this giant piece of limestone block and turning it into this. Again, he's using this as a model or a maquette as a way to picture what he's doing and get the things right because he has a really loud, powerful saw, um, probably some sort of diamond saw or whatever. Okay, so again, you have to get from this to this, but you have to remember that when you subtract something, can you add it back? Yeah, I guess kind of, but it's not going to have the same integrity as if it's just one solid piece. Okay, because this is just one solid piece here. The whole, it was cut out, but everything remains a solid block, just cut out in a specific way to resemble a hand, right? Here's a wood sculpture on the left that's attractive, and on the right here, 15 years of work, and the artist is pictured in the background. What can you say? All right, so the next type is casting. And casting is something that there's many different types of casting. It replaces one material with another permanent one via molds. So you can make a negative in the mold either directly or with a positive, then fill the mold with substance that will be set through a process depending on the material. So there's a couple things to do here. You could do this seems to be more of an industrial thing where you're making multiples of something, where you'll take, for example, plaster and or some soft material like wax that's easily carvable, and then you make some sort of mold over it, plaster. Okay, and so then you take the wax out of the mold, and then you fill it with other substances, right? And then you can use that casting over and over. Ice cube trays are the most common form of casting. And you could consider those sculptures, sure. Why not? If how depending on how broad your definition is. But one of the processes we're not going to watch a video of, unfortunately, but I really want you to is a one-time use thing. And that that is and so this is okay, ice cube tray. All right. So yeah, here's an example of here's a lost wax method. I think the slides are a little bit weird. But yeah, so I highly recommend watching this video. It's this cool oops, it's this cool ah, stop motion. It has this beautiful ambient soundtrack to it. So basically what you're doing is you're making something out of wax. You could cast that from a head, you could carve it out. You're putting it in a plaster or other sort of material. Uh, what is it called? Cast. Okay, and then you melt the wax out of that cast. Okay, and then you put bronze in it, and then you fire in that bronze. So, quiz question. So if you wanted to do something that like intricate, such as this, that's made of metal, where it's not really feasible to carve it, you would use this method. You would be using a cast method. You would be using lost wax, right? Because like carving out something like this, it's easier to do that with a softer, more pliable material than the bronze itself, right? So, yeah. Okay. So here's other instances of bronze, right? So you can see this is a quote unquote craft, according to what some people might say, but is it art? But you can see that once you watch that video, you'll see the kind of effort it takes to get something like this. Because it's a really intensive process. But if you want a bronze sculpture, that's how you do it. This is my cousin's daughter, and she did this for a community college in the art department. This was dedicated to my Nana, my grandma. She passed away a few years ago. And so this was dedicated to her. And here's my cousin. And here's a cast of blood, the artist's own blood, hopefully, apparently. So yeah, so think about this. He only does this every 5 years. Otherwise, that might be medically dangerous. So think about why would someone want to do this? Think about the possible meanings behind this. Why would someone do this? I mean, one meaning is, oh man, would it be cool if I made a sculpture out of blood? That might have been the whole reason behind it. But if you think about creating a facsimile of your own head out of something that came out of your own body, that's kind of there's layers to that, right? Especially since it's every 5 years. Here's his self from 1996 as a representation of himself with his own blood, right? Think about what that could possibly mean and what he might strive to achieve by doing this. All right, assemblage, another type of sculpture process. This is John Layton again. Yes, he was one of my beloved people in my life. Here's him and one of his students, I think his name was Seth, maybe, helping him out making this horse. The horse is made out of found objects, or by found objects meaning materials that he didn't make himself, but he found. Right. So this is combining stuff together. It's an additive process, right? So here's, oh God, what is this called again? Assemblage. So think about what do you think about this as an artwork itself? Do you think it's cool? Do you think it's super metaphorical? Do you think it's lazy and stupid and pretentious? This is called Him and Her Hold the Root. What do you think the artist might mean by that? Think about the relationship between the chairs and the word root and the branch and this pillow, this cloth. I'm not sure what that is. Think about the angles. So sometimes art isn't always just about making stuff because of skill. Sometimes the more important thing is the idea. So why do you think the artist made it assemblage instead of, for example, making a bronze sculpture of this or making a drawing or painting of it? That's just something to consider why maybe having real materials that existed could have a more powerful impact. Especially if, well, him and her, what if these are the chairs of him and her? What if it's like, for example, the artist's parents or grandparents, and these were their chairs and they've long passed away? Does that change anything for you? So sometimes having assemblage is the most potent way because the objectness of the thing existing as it is, maybe that's the important part to it, right? That's not to say that if you don't like this process, and you value someone creating everything themselves, that's totally fine. And I will say that there is this like plunder ludics, which is base. well, I'll say plunderphonics. People know that more. We're basically using a lot of samples to make work. I'm not as big a fan of that as people constructing uh like rap beats out of just their own instruments or whatever. It's just a personal preference, but I respect the hell out of plunderphonics and plunderludics, which is making video games out of other constituent parts. Sarah Z does assemblage, but also original sculpture as well. But it's so intricate and chaotic that you can't help but think, holy crap, this is impressive stuff. All right, so these three are parts of this video here, which you need to watch. This is a very important video. But basically the gist of this is there's degrees of assemblage and found objects, where on the left here is Fountain, which Marcel Duchamp, basically a troublemaker, basically wanted to question the art establishment. He submitted this to an exhibition. It got accepted. The only thing he did, this is a urinal, by the way. The only thing he did was add our mutt, a nom de plume or whatever you call artist name. And so that was in the exhibit. It was just purchased. Murray Oppenheim added fur to a teacup and a saucer. Robert Rauschenberg painted on a bed, right? So think about the degrees of that. For me, it would make sense. That's not what I'm trying to say. I understand that people value different things in art. So these are so I definitely want you to watch the video and think about at what point do you feel that you can accept this as art, right? So maybe someone like I like the painting, I like this because it's actual painting, right? Someone like Marie Oppenheim, she took the effort to put this teacup in fur. Marcel Duchamp, I can appreciate that he really wanted to buck the establishment's norms, right? Or you might think this is just kind of garbage. It's lazy. I will tell you it's not lazy. Um, as far as creating artwork, it's, I would say it's, again, the more conceptual, more of an idea. It's not based in labor. And that wasn't his point to be lazy. The point was to upset the art establishment, right? So different goals. Same thing with this. Marie Oppenheim, this wasn't necessarily hard for her. Maybe it was just more about the idea of doing something surreal. And Rauschenberg, this was probably not hard to make, but maybe it's taking these materials and creating an alternative canvas and saying, you know what? I want to explore different avenues of making art. Right. And so it's easier to dismiss these artworks as BS because we're around in 2025 and this isn't shocking to us. At the time, these things were probably a lot more interesting and weird and crazy than they are today. So if you find yourself dismissing something, just think about, well, what could it have been like at the time when it was made, and what were the conditions in which this was made, and why would they make it at this time? And maybe they weren't meant to be lasting objects, but or maybe they were, but just think about, okay, why does this exist? So that's something to really ponder. Kinetic art is art that moves. We're going to talk more about this when we talk about time next week. So this is art that's powered by mechanical means, natural elements, electricity, or humans. And this is Strandbeasts. Again, here's a Connect sculpture that I made. This video is basically about how I sucked at making Connect sculptures. And I was trying to edit the video to make it look cool, but when I was editing, I realized, oh, yeah, I just sucked at this. So Connect sculptures are really fun and really cool to make, but they're extremely hard to keep to make, but they're even harder to keep going. And so this video, you can hear me in the background, like just struggling to get this thing working. And this is a self-portrait. Oops, sorry. This is installation. So installation is a site-specific art, meaning that the art is created with the space in mind. Whereas something like paintings for the most part, you can move them around different places and it's okay. With installations, you can't put this just anywhere, right? So here's an example here of Megan Geckler. She uses flagging tape for these installations. Okay, so you can see for this artwork that the flagging tape starts from this indentation in the wall, or this recession, I should say, and ends on this platform here. Okay, if the room was half the size, would it be the same installation? Would it be the same artwork? No, it wouldn't. If it was double the size, it would change your relationship with the artwork because why is there all this blank space around? Right. Well, you might say that here, but this takes a lot of space at the top. So she had this room in mind for making this. Okay. So in general, you can often walk around it. That's a big part of it. It can be quote unquote immersive, but also it is possible for stuff like infinity rooms, which some of you are familiar with already. Where, I mean, this is just technically a room and it can be built kind of anywhere. But it is an installation in the fact that these artworks, these objects exist within this room, right? So it is an installation, but it can be moved around. But I would say most of the time when installations are being considered, it's mostly specific to a gallery and it only exists for that certain amount of time, which kind of resists commercial impulses, but also if a collector's rich, they could probably just recreate a room somewhere or whatever. Okay, land art. So this is quick question. This is directly tied to site specificity, where the art exists on the land. So this is Andy Goldsworthy. Uh, he basically makes artwork out of nature and nothing else. So all of these are completely natural. They exist only within the space of he didn't bring any other materials. He has his hands. He might use some tools, but the snow is just snow. The ice is just ice. Okay. So of course with things like this, well, aren't they gone now? So yes, they are. They are absolutely gone. Because he lets nature reclaim them. He doesn't expect these to live forever. So what's the point of it, right? Yeah, I gave a pause there specifically because I want you to think about that. What's the point of doing this? Well, these are very beautiful photos, right? There's a lot of impressiveness here. He's making order out of nature in ways that really shouldn't be that way. But again, he's not destroying nature, he's altering it a little bit. And he's an environmentalist. So you can think about why someone would do this. Why would someone mess with nature? Or is it maybe art should just be nature? Why isn't nature pretty in itself? I don't know. Isn't this cool? There's millions of reasons why he might be doing this, right? So think about why someone would want to make something like this. But in either case, I think it's really cool and impressive. I definitely recommend checking out this entire um, trailer because it shows like the intensity of like, oh, here's this thing he's made. Oh, here it goes. And he does this over and over again. And he's a really intense person, if you couldn't tell. And I recommend watching the movie Rivers and Tides, a documentary on him. It's incredible. But it's like, yeah, I'm glad someone else is doing that and not me. This is Start Access, so I checked today. It's supposed to be completed by 2027, as early as 2026, but it was started and conceived in 1971. The construction start actually began in 76, and so this has been a long time coming. I also read another estimate by 2030, so which I'm guessing was probably more likely. But it's at a specific place to observe the sun and the stars, right? And so it's tied to the land. It has to exist in this one specific place because it is aligned to the celestial bodies. Now, here's an example of bringing something to a gallery space. This is also land art. So this is, I have to move this caption box. This is Earthly Paradise by Delcy Morelos. She's Colombian, and this is some soil from Colombia, I believe, from what I read. Okay, and she also includes things such as cinnamon cloves, uh, tobacco, whatever, stuff that's native to her soil, right? So, and this was done in an arms bunker, this building right here. Why do you think she might have chosen to bring Earth into this? Why in a sort of weapons, arms, military bunker type installation? Think about the contrast between those two things, Earth and violence, essentially. That's how she talked about it. Right. And people are being forced, well, not being forced, but when you go through this space, you have to walk through these things. What might that mean to you? Of course, this is something that's not necessarily meant to just be looked at. It's meant to be thought about. Why is there Earth here? Why is it in this shape? Why is it very much or geometric shapes and not the regular organic shapes? Okay. Virtual space objects. So this is 2001, done in the year 2001. So Liz Larner, she used a CNC program and or animation program, and she basically caught a few frames of when sphere was transforming into a cube and vice versa. And so she took that information and CNC'd it, exported it, and made it into an object. So could a human have done this? Possibly, but it makes more sense to do it in a computer and make it real. Essentially, a giant 3D print. Okay, and this is another sort of use that's very niche of using clay in as being printed out, right? You can see clay material is not really meant to be like this, and that's why it's falling like noodles. But you can see humans are probably not going to be able to be this specific, or sorry, this precise. Documenting objects. So this is a whole nother thing in itself that could have been talked about beforehand, but let's talk about afterwards. Okay, so sculptures, especially freestanding sculptures, they're documented and shown on a flat screen. Most of the if you can't be there. How does that change the effect of that? How is that different than just looking at the object itself? It's because you don't feel the presence of it. You don't have the sense of scale. You, most times you're not supposed to touch sculptures, but you don't see the texture there as clearly, right? And so when you document an object, you're essentially compromising it. You're not going to get the full effect. And that's okay because we're not rich and we can't afford to fly everywhere to look at everything, right? And so R.D. Vierkant did this series called Image Objects, where these were real sculptures in 3D space, in meat space, in real life, basically. And so he understood the difference between the object itself and the documentation of an object. And so this series was he made some things in Photoshop and he had them printed out by CNC machine, fabricator, whatever. But he also, when he documented it, he also added like these Photoshop elements, like this digital paint stripe here, right? You don't see the object perfectly intact. You see the person holding a gray card here. This is called a gray card. It's to measure the light and color balance. It's called gray card because it was specifically only gray for black and white film photography. It might be called a color card. I don't know. But anyways, so you can see here this pink little blush right here. This is only inside the photograph. And so he uses that different colors, use different Photoshop effects to show that this photograph, this documentation is different than the object itself, right? Okay, so here is a sculpture of David by Michelangelo. This was photographed by in 2016 and uploaded in 2017 by Jörg Bittner Una. Sorry. So if you, and I'm being specific about the documentation because we're talking about documentation. This is how the person decided to capture this. So there might be some of you who have seen this. I've seen this in person, and it was different than I expected. And this is the reason why. Look how large he is. Okay. So when we typically see this, we see it something like this, where the context is not given. We don't get a sense of scale with the decorations back here. But we do when there's a person here. And same with this, even though it shows more of a context, you still don't really understand how large that is because this could be at a smaller scale. But when you put a person next to David, you understand, oh, that's freaking large. So the way things are documented are a subjective view of things. When it comes to objects, it's a subjective view of thing. Now, you can argue that if a digital artist made a digital painting on a super large screen, like a 40-inch screen, whatever, and then you look at it on your phone, it might not be the same intended experience, but it's pretty close because because digital artwork is 2D that exists in the screen, and you're looking at it on the screen in 2D. 3D marble is a completely different beast. So you want to consider the fact that when you're looking at 3D sculptures, you're getting a compromised subjective view. And the photographer is choosing what's important. That's why I had the photographer's name listed here, is because this is what this person chose to capture, right? I mean, it's nothing special because it's kind of what we've seen, but I would say this is probably my favorite documentation of David, because it just really gives you a better idea. So I'm gonna see if this. Oh, oh, dang it. So I guess I'm not. I was gonna say I'm gonna see if this puppy model works, but um, I can't. I'm not. This is the last slide. I'm gonna have to. I'd have to sign in again. I'm not gonna do that. So, so you can click that link yourself. Check out the puppy. But basically, what it is it's an you don't have to download anything. You just click it. It's a link to a website, and you can see an animation of the puppy on a walk cycle. It's walking in place, and then you can rotate the camera around it. And so my question to you is, do you think that's a more accurate view of the puppy rather than just a still image of it? And that's just something to consider. But I definitely recommend taking a look at that. All right. Yeah, I'm lucky that was the last slide. So yeah, don't forget to do your quiz. I posted or the directions to the activity number 4 on part 1 at the end. So yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you watch all the videos. Please go watch the videos. They're really incredible. Um, thanks and see y'all never, but chat with you sometime. Toodles.